Hello, welcome back to Bible class. I brought something in my bag that I'm going to share with you tonight. Okay. Do you see this? Is that something you might eat for breakfast? Have you ever had cereal for breakfast? I also have something else in my bag. This is going to be a little bit surprising. Look at this. Chick-fil-A. Do you see that bagel right there? We drove through Chick-fil-A this morning. Have some of you ever been there to eat breakfast? All of these things have something in common. I love crackers. Do you love Wheat Thins? And I made something else this week that's in my big bag. The last thing that's down in there, party mix. I made that in my oven. Have you ever had yummy party mix before? Ooh, it makes our house smell so good. And we've been eating on it all week. That's sort of a fall food. All of these things come from seeds that are planted in the ground. You see those Wheat Thins? You have to start with some grains and some grains to make mini wheats. And our story tonight is so exciting. I'm going to share it with you. We're outside and it's Halloween, but that's okay. You may hear the dogs barking. You may hear some children talking, but that's okay. We're going to talk very loudly over all of that. We've already talked about fall. We've already talked about all the good things that come in fall. I had a little granddaughter, Jovi, that picked a leaf up today, and she said, we know it's fall because the leaves are falling. Have you been outside? And tonight, there's a great big harvest moon. It's called the hunter's moon tonight. I hope you get outside and see some of it. Maybe it'll still partially be there tomorrow night. And it is a season called harvest. Can you say that big word, harvest? That means when all the seeds that are planted in the ground start to come up and they grow until it's time to pick those and to harvest them, to gather in all of the grain so that people can feed each other or they can feed the hay to their animals maybe. So we're going to talk more about that later. I had a lot of pictures done that we had last week. I want to show you some of the many different types of pictures. That looks pretty fabulous. And this is one that Hunter did. She made fall leaves on her picture. I hope some of you made pictures last week. And there's Jovi's. You see Jovi's? She did that by herself. And that one's Jovi's too. She painted. I hope you got to paint some. And that one's Jovi's too. I hope you got to have some paint or some fall leaf pictures or make the burning bush like we did last week. If you didn't, go back and watch it. Our story tonight is going to be so special because Mama Dean's going to tell it to you. It's one of our favorite stories always when Mama Dean tells the story. She's getting to be 84 years old and she's taking care of her sister at her house who is 96 years old. So it was a special night to get to see my Aunt Doris and my mama called Mama Dean. Ooh, it's kind of chilly out here. It's time to put on the Bible Bears jacket for fall. I hope you have some jackets to put on because it was kind of cold. We went to the zoo today and all of our grandchildren had to bring a sweatshirt or something to cover up early this morning. And the Bible Bear also has a hat, but he's just going to wear his hoodie and stay awfully warm and toasty out here with us tonight. Do some of your mommies make bread? This is my bread mix, and this is my bread pan. I'm going to make a loaf of bread for Mr. David, but to get the flour, you have to first have grown the wheat and cut the wheat. And that reminded me of a story that I used to tell my children long ago. You may have heard part of this story. Have you ever heard of the story of the little red hen? This is not our Bible story, but this little story is a pretend story that reminds me a lot of the story we're going to talk about tonight. This mama hen found some grains of wheat, and she thought, oh, good, I'll have some bread to feed my baby chicks. And she said, who will come help me plant this wheat? Not I, quacked the duck. Not I, quacked the pig. Not I, meowed the cat. So the mother hen said, then I'll do it myself. And she did. Do you remember that story? And then it was time to care for the growing wheat. And she said, who will help me care for the wheat this summer? and water it. And not I, said the quack the duck. He's lazy. Not I, the pig. Not I, meowed the cat. And she said, I'll take care of it myself. And she did. And not long after that, the wheat grew. Do you remember how it grew up? And she said, who will help me cut the wheat? Do you think the friends helped her? Not I, quacked the duck. Not I, quacked the pig. Not I, meowed the cat. She said, okay, I'll cut the wheat by myself. And she did. Then it was time to take the wheat to the mill to be ground into flour. She said, who will help me take my wheat to the mill to be ground into flour? She wanted some flour to bake breads for her chicks. Her friends were too lazy, weren't they? Not I, quacked the duck. Not I, quacked the pig. Not I, meowed the cat. She said, then I'll do it by myself. And she did. And she got the flour. Then it was time to make the bread. And she said, who will help me make the bread? Not I, quacked the duck. Not I, quacked the pig. Not I, meowed the cat. She said, then I'll take care of it myself and I will make the bread by myself. And she did. Oh, look at that tasty loaf of bread. Who will help me bake the bread? She wanted to go do some things too, but she didn't have any helpers. Not I, quacked the duck. Not I, quacked the pig. Not I, meowed the cat. So she said, I'll do it by myself. And she did. And then, guess what happened? After all of her hard work, she had a tasty, warm loaf of fresh bread. And she said, who will help me eat the bread? Ooh, look at them. They heard her say that. I will, said Quack the duck. I will, quink the pig. I will, meow the cat. And she said, I found the wheat. I sowed the wheat. I took care of the wheat. I took the wheat to the mill to be ground into flour. I baked the bread. I made the bread. And I will eat it all myself. And she sat down and fed the bread to her chicks and didn't give a bite to her friends. But our Bible story turns out with a better ending than that, because at the very end, our Bible story has somebody sharing in the end. But it does remind me of this story a lot. Does it remind you of that too, Mr. David?
Sure does.
I love that story. So our Bible story tonight is not the Adam and Eve story. That was long ago. And then we talked about Noah, and coming on down, there's Abraham with all the stars around his head. And I think I see Joseph's coat coming down through here. Do you see that, Mr. David?
Mm-hmm.
And then tonight, I see a woman that has some grain in her hand, some wheat, and it was harvest time. This time of year, maybe. So that's the story we're going to have that Mama Dean's going to tell us. As we drove along to Memphis today, I saw some tractors in the roads. I saw some farm equipment. We stopped and we looked at some of those fields. On either side of the road, we saw hay bales. We saw some cotton growing. I forgot to do wide. Huge view. Did you get some? Yeah. And that type of thing is going to be part of our story. So I want you to think about it when my mama starts talking. Think about all the wheat fields on the sides of the road that you've seen when you've been driving on trips. And I want you to listen very carefully, okay?
You've been studying about the people of God that came up out of Egypt and went to the new land that God gave them. And they were led by Moses. And we studied that the last few weeks, and they got to their new land. Today we're going to study one family that came to that new land, and they lived in the town of Bethlehem. You may remember somebody else that lived in Bethlehem, some special person that was born there, and that would be Jesus. But that's a long time later. Right now we're going to talk about the family that lived in Bethlehem. That was Naomi and her husband Elimelech, and their two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. They lived in Bethlehem, but there came a drought. No rain, no crops, no corn, no wheat. So they had to move and go somewhere that there was food to eat. They would get hungry. So they moved to the land of Moab. Now, the people in Moab didn't worship God. Most of them worshiped idols that they made with their hands and called them gods. But they lived there while they were getting to eat food and making a new home for themselves, and they lived there 10 years. And during those 10 years, Mahlon and Chilion married. They married Ruth and Orpah, and they were good girls. They loved Naomi, and they loved Elimelech. But Elimelech died, and then Mahlon and Chilion died. And that left Naomi, just Naomi, with her daughters-in-law. She decided to go back to Bethlehem and live. That's where her people were. And she had heard it rained and there was food there. So she told her daughter-in-laws, you go back home and live with your people and stay where you grew up and lived in Moab. But they didn't want to leave Naomi. And they clung to her, held her with their arms and cried. And said they didn't want to go back. But she said, yes, you need to go back. You'll marry again. I don't have any more sons for you to marry. So Orpah kissed her, but left and went back home to live with her people. But Ruth didn't leave. She said, no, don't ask me to leave you or to return from following after you. Because wherever you go, I'm going. And where you lodge, I'll lodge. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. No more of those idols. Where you die, I'll die, and there I'll be buried. And she said, the Lord hears that, and he'll punish me if I don't follow what I said to you. I'm going with you. And Ruth said, all right. Naomi said, all right, I'll take you with me, my daughter-in-law. She loved Ruth. And she went back home to Bethlehem, and all the people turned out to see her. And they said, here comes Naomi. And she said, call me Sarah, because I left full. I had so much. I had a husband and 2 sons. And now I came back empty. But she wasn't empty because she had Ruth, who loved her and took care of her. Some people don't love their mother-in-laws. They love their mothers, but they don't love their mother-in-laws as much, and there are lots of jokes about that. But Ruth loved her mother-in-law, and she took care of her. Now we're taking Ruth out into the field to glean for the wheat and the corn that fell from the harvesters. And she got just lots of it because Boaz had come by and said, who is this girl that's picking up wheat and working so hard? And they said, that's the daughter-in-law of Naomi. And he said, oh, I've heard about her. She trusts in God. And she's a good worker. She comes to work early. She stays late. She takes a little break at lunch. He said, leave lots of grain in the field. Don't just leave the leftovers. Give her plenty of grain. And he went to her and he said, come and eat with us. When we pull out our lunch and our water, come and drink with us and eat with us. He was so good to her. He said, don't go to anybody else's field. We'll take care of you. And when she got home with all of this wheat she had gleaned, Naomi was so happy. She had bread to make for lots of time for herself and for Ruth. And so Naomi said, since he's been so nice to you, why don't you go and show him that you would be willing to be his wife? So she went down to the threshing floor where he was and let him know that she would be happy to be his wife. And he said, well, he was so complimented. He said, you could have married one of these younger men, one of these strong young men that works in the field, but you've chosen me, an older man, and I want to marry you. And he did. And he and Ruth were so happy together, and she worked so hard to make the living that she needed for Naomi and to take care of her mother-in-law. And God blessed her with the best gift of all, a little baby boy. They named him Obed. And Obed was the grandfather of David. You know David, the little shepherd boy, the one that killed the giant, the one that became king of Israel, the great king of Israel. Well, this is the granddaddy of David. So Ruth and Boaz had a happy home together, and God blessed them.
When I go to our farm up in Tennessee, a lot of my cousins and my aunts and my uncles all live up there, and there's a pear tree, and we get to pick pears out of the trees. They still grow at the farm. I might have told you that before. We're gonna make sensory boxes tonight. And if you've saved any of your summer toys, if it's a little pail or a shovel and you have that to put in your box, that would be good. If you don't, that's okay. If you have a scoop, I have a couple of different scoops I'm gonna put into my sensory box. In this first box, I have oatmeal and 2 kinds of apples. Red apples, and these could actually be green apples or pears. And we're gonna have a little basket and gather those out of the sensory box if you want to. I'm just going to use the green spoon to pick up the green apples, and maybe the red spoon to sort out the red apples. And this is one of my granddaughter's favorite things to do. She pretends she's making apple pies out of the oatmeal, the grain, and these buckets of apples. I wanted to show that to you. Gather your baskets of grain for harvest like Ruth did. Here's Ruth with her mother-in-law named Naomi. And she went with her because it was not a short trip. It was 50 miles. And that's a long way to go if you don't have cars and you don't have any roads. She hated for her mother-in-law to go that far by herself, and she wanted to keep her safe. And that was very loving, wasn't it? And here's the grain that she helped provide. When they didn't have any food, she was willing to work, and she shared it with her mother-in-law. And then that's when she found her husband. I wanted to show you the little hearts. They're the ones that had the baby. We talked about that. Mama Dean told you about that, didn't she? If you can see this, there is where Naomi and Ruth went. They lived in Moab, and they had to go all the way back to Bethlehem, right here. That's Bethlehem. That was a 50-mile journey, and that was a long way to go all by themselves. Mr. David's going to work a little craft for you, and he'll put this grain in the basket, and that's something you can watch. If you don't have one of these at home, maybe you can make a sensory box out of some type of rice or oatmeal or popcorn, and gather. You can put cotton balls down in there and gather the cotton.
For our craft tonight, this is what the finished product will look like. Can you see that? I'm going to start off with the side of the basket that has a scripture on it. And on the back is some double-sided tape that you're going to peel the backing off of.
Good job.
And then put it right there on that basket. And that's made a little opening so that we can store our grain.
Nice.
And then we're going to put a handle on there with these sticky circles. Just like that. Now you can hang it on your refrigerator or on your doorknob of your room.
Awesome.
And then we have 3 sheaves of wheat. And this is what Ruth would have gleaned from the fields of Boaz and put it in her basket to take home to her mother-in-law and their family so that they could cook it up and make bread for their meal.
Nice. Okay, do you remember our story last time about God giving all of his children of Israel the bread and in the baskets that they gathered on the ground? And it was called what? Do you remember? Can you say manna? That's right. And tonight we talked about how Ruth gathered the wheat to make bread. We also talked about the little red hen, and she thought she did it all herself. She thought she watered it and weeded it and did it all herself. But do you know who really gives us bread and gives us all of our food? God does. And that's why we always try to say a prayer. Jesus taught us that we're supposed to give thanks before we eat. This is the prayer that he prayed. Our Father in heaven, holy is your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Now look at this. Give us this day our daily bread. You see that little boy having his food? He knew to thank God for that. He didn't just eat it all himself, but he said, thank you to God. Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Lead us not into temptation. We don't want to do bad things. For yours is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. Amen. That's a good prayer to say before your food every day and say thank you for your bread. I just love farms, and I wanted to share some of my farm toys that I've collected with you. And so we're just going to lay them all out on this table, and I'm going to show you some of the things that I enjoy. Some tractors that I've had, some of my children's toys, some of my grandchildren's toys, and I hope you enjoy seeing them too. Oh, wow, this is my favorite one. You see that tractor? Do you have a tractor toy at home? See that tractor? Ezra and Lily went to Disney World this week, so I got this one out for them. That's the little Mickey Mouse tractor. And this one needs a farmer. I have a farmer in this toy. You see him in there? It's another Mickey Mouse. Is that going to be for Lily, maybe? Do you know who had a baby this week? Adeline and William had a baby. And I heard the sweetest prayers being said. Asher said a prayer for the baby, for it to come safely. And I heard William and Adeline say a sweet prayer for the baby. Mr. David, do you know the baby's name?
The baby's name is Jameson.
Jameson. Do you have farm toys at home? Maybe you can get your farm toys out and think a little bit about harvest this week. This actually is not part of harvest. Mr. David said this is tills the ground to plant the grain. We don't need that piece. But this right here, Mr. David just made this silo to keep the grain in. Have you ever seen a big tall silo by the side of the road to keep grain in? Ooh, I just broke it. If you don't have sensory bin at home to make with grain, maybe you can play farm toys. That's one of our favorite things to do on rainy days. We've had a lot of rain lately, but it takes a lot of rain to grow all the crops to feed us and to feed all the animals, doesn't it, Mr. David? Mm-hmm. If it rains this week, maybe you can play with some of your farm toys, or maybe you can put some grain in a bin and make a sensory bin out of it and think about farming and thank God for the rain too, because it takes a lot of rain to grow all the food we need and all the food that the animals need. I've had fun tonight. Mr. David and I surely enjoyed spending time with you on this Halloween night, and I hope you have a good week. We'll see you soon.
Sowing in the morning, sowing seeds of kindness.